John Brown's raid at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. And I told you yesterday that in October of 1859, an abolitionist by the name of John Brown made his second tragic contribution to the issue of slavery. Remember, his first is when he murdered 5 pro-slavery men in Lawrence, Kansas. And what he did is he gathered together a group of 18 followers, and he put together a 4-part strategy. First, he and his men were going to attempt to seize the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. That arsenal was the largest arsenal in the United States at the time. It held over 20,000 rifles, muskets, and pistols at a market value of today's money, $7 million. The second thing he was going to do is he was going to arm the slaves that he believed would flock to his side. Once he did that, then he was going to establish a government in the mountains of Virginia, a black government. And the fourth thing he was going to do is he was going to train the blacks and wage his own private war against the South. Kind of a crazy plan, but that's what he wanted to do. Now, I want to make a point, I didn't tell you this yesterday, that his followers, 18, 5 were his own sons. He had 5 of his sons with him. And what did he do? He did start phase 1, so to speak, and he did attack the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry. Now, this is kind of like the slap the bull thing. Have I ever talked to you about slap the bull? No. So if Megan and I go out tonight after school to a farmer's field, and he's got this big bull corralled, and the bull's about half asleep, and he's got his butt face to both of us, I'm going to have a slap the bull contest with Megan. I'm going to run up there, sneak up there, and I'm going to slap that bull on the butt, and I'm going to run back and be safe. Then it's going to be Megan's turn. Yeah, and the bull's now, he's awake, so when Megan goes up there and slaps him, she's going to have to run pretty fast to get out of there. The point being is the arsenal was pretty poorly defended, so it didn't take anything for Brown and his men to get in there and gather up the weapons. But the word got out, the problem's going to be what? Getting out. Okay? So they did get in, yeah, and not without much trouble, Cole. Really, the arsenal was poorly defended, so breaking in was kind of a pushover. However, getting out with the weapons is going to be the major problem for Brown. Okay? Well, first of all, not one single slave joined the effort. You know, he thought these slaves had flocked to his side. They didn't do it. So when word gets out about Brown's actions at the federal arsenal, the United States Marines, under the command of Colonel Robert E. Lee, arrived. Okay? So, again, the problem compounded for John. He thought these slaves would come to his efforts, join his efforts. They did not. And when word got out about Brown's actions at the federal arsenal, the United States Marine Corps, under the command of Colonel Robert E. Lee, yes, the same man that turns out to be a Civil War general, arrived. And keep in mind, at this point, he's fighting for which side? The Union, because we haven't had a dissolve yet. Okay, so he's an officer in the Union Army, and he arrives with troops to make sure that John Brown and his men do not get out of that arsenal with weapons. Well, Colonel Lee and his men trap John Brown and his followers, his 18 men, in the federal arsenal, and after a 2-day standoff, Brown surrenders to Colonel Lee. So Colonel Robert E. Lee and the United States Marine Corps troops show up. They trap Brown and his men in this federal arsenal. They have a 2-day fight. And finally, Brown surrenders to Colonel Lee. How many men do you have with him? 18. 10 of those men were killed in this little skirmish. 10 of his men were killed. All 5 of his sons. 10 men were killed out of the 18, including all 5 of his sons. Quite a price he paid, didn't he, for craziness? Yeah, and he's going to pay the ultimate price in a minute as well. Okay, so during the ordeal, 10 of Brown's men were killed, including his 5 sons, and he's going to be later tried of treason against the United States of America. So he loses 10 of his 18 men in this fight for the arsenal at Harpers Ferry. 10 of the men were killed, as I mentioned, including all 5 of his sons. He would later be tried and convicted of treason against the United States. What's the sentence for that? No. What type? Hanging by the neck until dead. Okay? So, again, John Brown was later tried and convicted of treason against the United States and was sentenced to death by hanging. Now, this is an interesting quote. I want you to kind of get this down when we talk. I'll repeat it several times, so don't panic. On December 2nd of 1859, on December 2nd of 1859, John Brown was hanged by the neck until dead. On December 2nd, 1859, John Brown was hanged by the neck until dead. You want me to tell you his legacy? This is what I want you to write down. What's your legacy, first of all? How people remember you. What good, bad, and otherwise. Here's his legacy. The terrorist of the South became the martyr of the North. I'll spell martyr. But the terrorist of the South, the man that terrorized the South, the terrorist of the South, becomes the martyr of the North. The terrorist of the South becomes the martyr of the North. Here's how you spell martyr. M-A-R-T-Y-R. M-A-R-T-Y-R. John Brown was hanged on December 2nd, 1859, and became the terrorist of the South, becoming the martyr of the North. What's a martyr? Anybody know what a martyr is? Someone that dies for a cause, either good or bad. In this case, what they're saying is the terrorist of the South, the man that terrorized the South, became the hero, so to speak, of the North, became the martyr, the man that died for a great cause. So he's remembered in history in 2 different ways by 2 different sections of our country, right? Interesting fellow. Now, this is kind of interesting. He left a note in his cell prior to his hanging. He left a note in his cell prior to his hanging. And this is what it said. You don't really have to write this down. If you want to get it, you can look on the video. But this is what the note said that he left in his cell prior to his hanging. It said, I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I'll repeat it and explain it to you. I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land, meaning the United States, will never be purged away but with blood. I want you to think about how prophetic that is. He says, I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land, the United States of America, will never be purged away. The crimes will never go away but with blood. What's he referring to that actually happened? The American Civil War. That's exactly right. The crimes of the United States would never go away. The North would never feel good about the South, and the South would never feel good about the North again unless with blood. And he was absolutely correct. Yeah. All right, that's going to take us to a really famous election. And a lot of this will be on your test. This election will be important on your test. And we'll go over all this. But the election of 1860, because it's the election that elects who as president? Abraham Lincoln. But it's not a simple election. We've had some weird ones, right? We had the favorite son policy where the Whigs nominated 3 people hoping it would get into the House of Representatives and it failed. We've had some interesting elections. The election of 1860 has its own interesting scenario too. Okay? All right. Pay attention to this because it matters in presidential elections. Prior to this election, the Democratic Party was split on their views of slavery. Obviously then some support slavery and some don't. Okay, Democratic Party was interesting, okay? There weren't just, in the southern states, there weren't just Democrats. There were Democrats also, kiddos, in the north. So people who belonged to the political party called the Democrats lived in both sections of the country. So some of them were for slavery, right? And some of them were against slavery. The ones that took a very strong pro-slavery position were obviously Southern Democrats, the ones that lived in the South, okay? Now, Northern Democrats weren't jackwagons about it. What Northern Democrats really believed that popular sovereignty ought to solve the slavery issue. So what are they saying? Anybody remember?
The state decides.
The state decides. If the state decides that it should be free, it's free. If the state decides it'll be slave, it'll be slave. So they're not as radical in their views on slavery as the South. The South is absolutely 100% without doubt, strong feelings, if slavery, 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 slavery. The North's saying, listen, we don't agree totally with that. I think each state should decide. That's how they thought. So that was kind of the split in the Democratic Party. It's never good in politics to have a split within your party, because what it does is it splits votes and it gives the opponent the advantage, without question, every time. Now let's explain this to you. As a result of their differences, do you think the Democrats just chose one candidate for president? No, they chose two, no question about it. The Southern Democrats, actually, I didn't mention this, but nominated James Buchanan's Vice President, John C. Breckinridge, which is on your sheet. So the Southern Democrats will nominate for president James Buchanan, President Buchanan's Vice President, John C. Breckinridge. That's who the Southern Democrats. Who's the most popular Democrat in the North right now? We've talked about it before. It's a senator from Illinois. Stephen Douglas. Go ahead, dear.
So wait, was the guy John Buckingham or
Breckinridge. John C. Breckinridge. Yep. Okay, who's the most powerful Northern Democrat? Stephen Douglas. He will be the Northern Democrats' nominee for president. So you split the party, which gives the advantage normally to the other party. Okay? So we're pretty set with the Democratic Party. Southern Democrats nominate President Buchanan's Vice President, John C. Breckinridge. Northern Democrats nominate popular Senator Stephen Douglas. Now the Republican Party hadn't done much. And so they're not too sure on who they want to nominate. There's no front runner, really. Well, after the success that Abraham Lincoln had in the Lincoln-Douglas debate we talked about, even though he lost, he became a candidate they were considering nominating. The other one was the governor of New York, a guy by the name of William Seward, who is also on your ID sheet. So the Republican Party gets together and they're discussing two possible men to nominate for the presidency. They're not going to nominate two. Why? Because it's their disadvantage to do so. The Democrats have already put themselves at a disadvantage, right? So they get to convention and they're trying to pick between Abraham Lincoln and Governor William Seward of New York. Now, I don't know if I've 3, 4, or 5 different classes, so I don't remember what I tell everybody. Did we go over the process of first ballot, second ballot, and picking a presidential candidate? Did we ever talk about that? About what? How a party picks a presidential candidate? Well, let me explain to you again. If I said this, I'm being repetitive, just let me know. So, what happens, and then I'll talk about the election of 1960, for example, which was probably the best example, okay? What happens is the Democratic Party got together, and there were 4 people that wanted to be president at that time. Kind of like you got Lincoln and Seward. They had John F. Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, Stuart Symington, Lyndon Johnson, Adlai Stevenson. 5 guys that kind of threw their hat in the ring to get the Democratic nomination for president in 1960. Well, what happens is each state sends in voting delegates to the convention based on population. So, they're called delegates, and they're all a member of the same party. So what happened in 1960 is all these delegates, so many from each state, get together. And let's say that Alabama has 35 delegates votes, because they're bigger, okay? They have a bigger population. So what they do is they would get up and they'd say, the great state of Alabama, home of the national champion Crimson Tide football team, gives their 38 delegate votes to the next president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. So his delegate votes go to Lincoln. They go right down the alphabetical order. Okay, and they might get to the great state of Arkansas, home of the Razorbacks, gives 15 delegate votes to Abraham Lincoln and 13 to William Seward. And anyway, you start accumulating these votes. Does that make sense? And then when you get to a certain number, you win the nomination. So that should make sense, right? And that roll call ballot from, Alabama to Wyoming is called a first roll ballot. So what happens if after you go through all the states, that one of the candidates doesn't have the number of votes you need, the 2/3 majority vote, what happens then? Go to a second ballot, and everything starts over. So Alabama, who gave their 38 to Lincoln on the first ballot, after some politicking among people at the convention, might end up giving theirs to the other guy. So if you go to a second ballot, it becomes an issue. Now, I'm getting off task, but I'll make a point here in a minute. John Kennedy, everybody needed 761 delegate votes in that election of 1960. When it came, it was close. It got all the way down to Wyoming. And because Wyoming gave their 23 delegate votes to John Kennedy, he got the nomination for president on the first ballot, right? Because if he didn't, they'd have went to a second ballot. Historians will tell you all day long that Kennedy probably would not have won the nomination if we'd have gone to a second ballot. Now you think about what's Wyoming's role in American history. If they don't give their 23 votes to John Kennedy, none of these pictures are up here. There's no presidential assassination, one of the most public things in American history. Who knows how history changes without John F. Kennedy being president, good, bad, or otherwise. So you see how the process works, right? Well, in this particular case, the Republicans at the convention, the delegates, were trying to decide between Lincoln and Seward. And they had a very difficult time. And it took 4 separate ballots. They went through that process 4 times before somebody won. Now you've got to keep in consideration there were not 50 states at that time. So you would never see it today ever go to 4 ballots, and very seldom, in a very rare instance, would it go to 2. Okay? But anyway, it went to 4. So we're going to tell you how it came out in each of the 4 separate ballots. So when the Republicans got together and these delegates voted, here's how the first ballot came out. Seward actually won the delegate votes. He had more delegate votes than Lincoln, but he didn't have what? 2/3 majority. So he won in the votes, but neither candidate, neither Lincoln or Seward, had 2/3 majority. So it went to a second ballot. What happened on the second ballot is they were almost dead even. And still no one had what, William? 2/3 majority. Very good. Second ballot was almost dead even. So people had changed their votes, didn't they? Because there was some politicking going on in between. So they go to a third ballot. On the third ballot, Lincoln wins, and he's 2 votes short of 2/3 majority. So it goes to a fourth ballot. So the first ballot, Seward has more than Lincoln, but he doesn't have 2/3. Second ballot, they're almost dead even. Neither obviously has the majority. In the third ballot, Lincoln has a big majority, but not 2/3. He's 2 votes short. And finally, on the fourth ballot, Lincoln wins enough delegate votes to get 2/3 majority, and he now is the candidate. That doesn't mean that he's won the election. He's just won the Republican nomination. And he will run against who? Breckinridge for the Southern Democrats and Douglas for the Northern Democrats. Well, usually when you have uncertainty, and you see uncertainty on both sides, the Democrats nominated 2 people. It took 4 ballots for the Republicans to get anybody. Normally when you get a situation like that, Other people that don't agree with either party are looking around, and what do they form? Another political party. Because people that aren't really hot on the Democrat candidates or the Republican candidates will form their own party. And a group did that, and they called themselves the Constitutional Union Party. And who made up most of those people? Come on, really impress me. What type of people made up the Constitutional Union Party? Former parties out of the picture. Whigs, very good. Former Whigs make up this new party called the Constitutional Union Party. So the Whig Party makes a comeback, but they don't call themselves the Whigs because the reputation's not good. They're going to call themselves the Constitutional Union Party. And they nominate Tennessee Senator John Bell for the presidency. So the former Whig Party recognizes there's some uncertainty among both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They want to take advantage of that. They form their own party called the Constitutional Union Party, and they nominate Tennessee Senator John Bell for the presidency. Now, this is going to be a 3-horse race from a party perspective, but a 4-horse race from a candidate perspective. Now, we all know from the election of 2018 that population makes a difference, right? Because population results in electoral votes, right? Where's the bigger population in 1860, the North or the South? Where do most people live? North. Okay, most of the people at this time in American history, the most populated states were located in the North, meaning that the most electoral votes were in the North. So it's pretty apparent that the candidate that wins the majority of the North